Atlanta, Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport was bustling on a Friday afternoon, as usual. The steady sound of announcements blared from the loudspeakers, mingling with the sound of suitcases rolling across the marble floors and the chatter of the throngs of passengers. The smell of coffee from nearby Starbucks counters mixed with the crisp air conditioning, creating a feeling both familiar and foreign. In the rush of people, Brianna Carter, a 23-year-old black woman, walked confidently but unpretentiously. She wore a navy blue wool coat, white sneakers with slight scuffs on the toes, and carried a small backpack containing her laptop and a few important documents. Brianna had just finished an internship at a Seattle startup, and today she was flying back to Atlanta to pitch a project that could change her career. A chance to prove herself to her family and those who had doubted her. Brianna grew up in a small neighborhood south of Atlanta, where old red brick houses crammed into potholed streets. Her parents, two retired factory workers, always taught her that hard work was the only way to get ahead. But life wasn't always fair to her. From her school days, Brianna had grown accustomed to being judged. From teachers who thought she wasn't smart enough to strangers on the bus who looked at her like she didn't belong anywhere better. Those invisible scars didn't break her, but instead molded her into a patient, sharp-witted person, always ready to prove her worth. Today, Brianna felt more optimistic than usual. She'd saved up every penny to fly business class, not to brag, but to enjoy a little comfort after months of hard work. As she walked up to the check-in counter at Sky High, one of the largest airlines in the United States, she smiled slightly at the thought that this time she would be treated like an important person. The check-in counter was gleaming with white lights. The staff in dark blue uniforms moved quickly, and the electronic board above flashed flight information. But as she looked around, Brianna couldn't help but feel a familiar feeling creeping in, a feeling of being scrutinized, as if she were an outlier in this luxurious space. Behind the counter, Lauren Mitchell, a 29-year-old flight attendant, processed the line of passengers with astonishing efficiency. Lauren was tall, her blonde hair tied back in a professional bun, her cool blue eyes scanning each passenger like a barcode scanner. She had worked for Sky High for 6 years, and in her mind, everything was in order. Who belonged in business class? Who didn't? Who deserved speedy service? Who needed a closer look? Lauren wasn't mean, but she had a strong belief that she was always right, that her instincts about people were never wrong. As Brianna approached, Lauren paused for a second, her eyes moving from Brianna's worn shoes to her inexpensive jacket, then to the young woman's gentle smile. There was something about the way Lauren looked at Brianna that sent a chill down her spine, not the friendliness of a concierge, but a judgmental look, as if she had been placed in a box she didn't want to be in. Brianna placed her ticket and passport on the counter, her voice soft but firm. 3:45 to Atlanta. I checked in online. Lauren picked up the ticket, flipping it over as if searching for an error. She typed quickly on the keyboard, her brows furrowed. The atmosphere between them suddenly became tense, though no one said anything more. Brianna glanced at her watch, 40 minutes to boarding. She didn't want to miss this flight. Not today. Not when everything she'd worked for was on the other side of the line. In the crowd behind her, a few passengers began to whisper. A middle-aged man in a gray suit muttered to the man next to him. Another one holding up the line. A mother holding a small child sighed, clearly tired of waiting. Brianna heard it, but she didn't turn around. She had long since learned to ignore the whispers. What she didn't expect was that what was about to happen next would be more than a minor inconvenience, but a much bigger challenge. One that would force her to confront the very thing she'd been working to overcome all her life. Lauren looked up from the screen, her voice as cold as stone. "I'm sorry, but your ticket isn't in the system. I need to double check. Let me see your passport." Brianna blinked, surprised but not panicked. She opened her backpack, took out her passport, and set it on the counter. "Here," she said, still calm. "I used it to go to Seattle last month. I should be fine." But as Lauren picked up the passport, a faint smile crossed her lips. Not a friendly one, but one of suspicion, of power. And then, things began to spiral out of Brianna's control. The hum of the Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport buzzed around Brianna Carter as she stood at the Sky High Airlines check-in counter, her heartbeat steady but her nerves tingling. The line behind her grew restless, a low murmur rising from the crowd like static on an old radio. She handed over her passport with a calm hand, expecting Lauren Mitchell, the flight attendant behind the counter, to glance at it, nod, and send her on her way. After all, this wasn't her first flight. She'd traveled to Seattle just a month ago with the same passport. No issues, no questions. But the moment Lauren's manicured fingers closed around the small blue booklet, something shifted in the air. The attendant's sharp blue eyes narrowed, her lips tightening into a thin line as she flipped through the pages with exaggerated scrutiny. "This doesn't look right," Lauren said, her voice cutting through the ambient noise like a blade. She held the passport up to the light, tilting it as if she were a detective inspecting a forged dollar bill. "I'm sorry, but this doesn't seem real." Her tone was cold, clipped, and carried a weight of authority that made Brianna's stomach twist. Brianna blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean? It's my passport. It's valid. I've used it before." Her words came out steady, though a flicker of confusion danced in her chest. She glanced at the clock above the counter. 3:15 p.m. 30 minutes until boarding. She couldn't afford a delay. Not today. Not with her presentation in Atlanta hanging in the balance. Lauren didn't respond immediately. Instead, she set the passport down on the counter, her fingers lingering on it as if it were contaminated. "Fake passports are a security risk," she said, loud enough for the people behind Brianna to hear. A few heads turned, eyes darting toward the scene. The man in the gray suit muttered something to his companion, and the mother with the toddler shifted her weight, her sigh audible. Lauren's gaze flicked up to meet Brianna's, and for a split second, Brianna saw it. A glint of disdain, a silent judgment that didn't need words to sting. It was a look she'd seen before, too many times, in too many places. The grocery store clerk who double-checked her ID, the professor who assumed she'd plagiarized her essay, the neighbor who asked if she really lived in their building. Before Brianna could protest, before she could even process the accusation, Lauren's hands moved. The sound came first, a sharp, tearing rip that sliced through the air like a gunshot. Gasps erupted from the crowd as Lauren tore the passport in half, the pages splitting cleanly down the middle. She tossed the pieces aside with a flick of her wrist, letting them flutter to the counter like discarded napkins. "We can't let you board with this," she said, her expression unreadable, her voice flat. "Next in line, please." Brianna's breath caught in her throat. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her ears. She stared at the shredded remains of her passport, her identity, her proof of existence, her ticket home, now reduced to trash in front of a dozen strangers. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from a raw, burning disbelief. That was real, she managed to say, her voice breaking slightly despite her effort to stay composed. That was my real passport. Lauren barely glanced at her, already reaching for the next passenger's ticket. If it was real, it wouldn't have been a problem, she replied, her tone dripping with dismissal. Step aside. You're holding up the line. The terminal seemed to freeze. The chatter died down, replaced by an eerie silence as eyes locked onto Brianna. A woman in a red coat clasped a hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. The man in the suit spoke up, his voice low but firm. I saw it. That passport looked fine to me. A teenage girl a few spots back pulled out her phone, the faint click of a camera shutter breaking the stillness. Brianna felt the weight of their stares, a mix of pity, curiosity, and discomfort pressing down on her like a physical force. Her mind raced. This wasn't just a mistake. This was personal. She could feel it in the way Lauren had looked at her, the way she'd raised her voice just enough to make a spectacle. It wasn't about the ticket or the passport. It was about Brianna herself, her age, her clothes, her skin. She'd seen that look too often to mistake it for anything else. It was the same look she'd gotten from the cashier at the corner store when she paid with a crumpled dollar bill. The same look from the security guard who followed her around the mall. But this time, it wasn't subtle. This time, it was bold, blatant, and public. Brianna's legs felt unsteady, her vision blurring at the edges, but she forced herself to stand tall. She gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles whitening. You can't just do that, she said, her voice louder now, cutting through the tension. That's my property. That's illegal. Lauren turned back to her, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. Illegal? Sweetheart, I'm doing my job, protecting this airline from people who think they can sneak through with fake documents. If you got a problem, take it up with security. She waved a hand dismissively, signaling for the next passenger to step forward. Move along. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. The mother with the toddler whispered something to her husband, who shook his head. The teenage girl kept filming, her phone steady in her hands. Brianna's chest tightened, a storm of emotion swirling inside her. Anger, humiliation, disbelief. She'd worked so hard to get here, scraped together every penny for that ticket, poured her soul into that internship, and now this woman, this stranger, had torn it all apart in seconds. Literally. She wanted to scream, to grab the pieces of her passport and shove them in Lauren's face, to demand an explanation. But she didn't. She'd been here before, in smaller ways, and she knew that reacting with anger would only make it worse. It would turn her into the stereotype Lauren clearly already saw. A loud, disruptive black girl causing trouble. No, she wouldn't give her that satisfaction. Not yet. Instead, Brianna took a deep breath, her hands still shaking as she gathered the torn scraps of her passport. This isn't over, she said quietly, her voice steady despite the tremor running through her. You'll hear from me. Lauren didn't even look up, already scanning the next ticket, her smirk widening as if she'd won some unspoken victory. Brianna stepped aside, her mind spinning. The crowd parted for her, their whispers following her like a shadow. She could feel the heat of their attention, the weight of their judgment, but she kept her head high. She wasn't just a nobody with a fake passport. She was Brianna Carter, and she wasn't going to let this slide. Not today. Not when everything she'd fought for was on the line. As she moved toward a quieter corner of the terminal, her hand slipped into her pocket. brushing against her phone. She had one call to make, one that would change everything Lauren thought she knew. Brianna Carter stood in the shadow of a towering flight information board, the torn pieces of her passport clutched tightly in her hand. The Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson terminal buzzed around her, announcements crackling over the intercom, the clatter of rolling suitcases, the faint hum of a distant jet engine, but it all faded into a dull roar as she fought to steady her breathing. Her pulse thrummed in her temples, a mix of fury and disbelief swirling in her chest. She glanced down at the shredded remains of her identity, the jagged edges of the pages cutting into her palm. That passport wasn't just a document. It was her ticket out of a life where people like Lauren Mitchell got to decide who she was before she even opened her mouth. She moved to a row of empty seats near a window, the afternoon sunlight streaming through the glass and casting long shadows across the polished floor. Her hands shook as she set the pieces on her lap, smoothing them out as if she could somehow piece herself back together. She wasn't crying, not yet, but her throat burned with the effort of holding it in. 23 years of proving herself, of clawing her way up from nothing, and it had all been reduced to this: a smug flight attendant tearing her apart in front of a crowd. Brianna's mind flashed back to Lauren's smirk, the way she'd tossed the passport aside like it was nothing, the way she'd called her sweetheart with that condescending lilt. It wasn't just about the passport, it was about power, about Lauren deciding Brianna didn't belong, not in business class, not in this airport, not in the world she thought she owned. Brianna had seen this before. Growing up in South Atlanta, she'd faced it in 100 small ways. The teacher who skipped over her raised hand, the store clerk who watched her every move, the kids on the bus who snickered when she pulled out a worn-out backpack instead of the latest brand. She'd learned to swallow it, to keep her head down and work harder, because that's what her parents had taught her. "They'll always try to push you out," her mom used to say, her voice rough from years on the factory floor. "But you don't let them. You fight with what's up here." She'd tap her temple, her eyes fierce. Brianna had taken that advice to heart, channeling every slight into fuel for her ambition. But today, swallowing it wasn't an option. Today, Lauren had crossed a line, and Brianna wasn't going to let it slide. Back at the check-in counter, Lauren Mitchell moved through the line with the same crisp efficiency, her confidence unshaken. She scanned tickets, flashed thin smiles, and waved passengers through, her mind already dismissing Brianna as a minor annoyance. To Lauren, it was simple. People like Brianna didn't belong in business class. She'd seen it before. Young kids with cheap clothes and big dreams, thinking a fancy ticket could erase where they came from. Lauren prided herself on her instincts, her ability to spot trouble before it happened. Tearing that passport? It was a gut call, and she didn't regret it. If anything, she felt a flicker of satisfaction. She'd done her job, kept the airline safe, and put that girl in her place. As far as Lauren was concerned, Brianna would slink off, embarrassed, and that would be the end of it. But Brianna wasn't slinking anywhere. Sitting by the window, she pulled her phone from her pocket, her thumb hovering over the screen. She could call security, file a complaint, demand a supervisor. She'd seen enough videos online to know how these things went. Someone would apologize, maybe offer her a voucher, and Lauren would get a slap on the wrist. That wasn't enough. Not this time. Her eyes drifted to the sky-high logo on a nearby sign, the sleek blue letters gleaming under the fluorescent lights, and then it hit her. Her uncle, James Carter, wasn't just anyone. He was the CEO of Sky High Airlines. one of the most powerful men in the industry. Brianna hadn't told anyone at the internship about James. She'd never wanted to be the CEO's niece. She'd fought tooth and nail to build her own path, to prove she didn't need a family name to succeed. James had offered to help plenty of times, pay for college, get her a job at Sky High. But she'd always turned him down. "I'll do it myself," she'd told him, her voice firm even at 18. He'd smiled, proud, and let her go her own way. But now, staring at the wreckage of her passport, Brianna felt a crack in that resolve. She didn't want to use him as a crutch, didn't want to be the girl who ran to her uncle when things got tough. Yet this wasn't just tough, this was wrong. Lauren hadn't just made a mistake, she'd humiliated her, broken the law, and acted like it was nothing. Her fingers tightened around the phone. She could handle this herself, couldn't she? She could march back to that counter, demand Lauren's name, and fight this through the proper channels. But the clock was ticking, 3:20 p.m. now, and her presentation in Atlanta was too important to risk. She needed to get on that plane, and she needed Lauren to face real consequences, not just a polite warning. With a shaky breath, Brianna scrolled to James's number and hit call. The line rang once, twice, then clicked. "Brianna?" James's voice came through, warm but edged with concern. He was in his office in downtown Atlanta, probably staring out at the skyline, a cup of black coffee cooling on his desk. At 55, James Carter was a towering figure, literally and figuratively, with a deep voice that could command a boardroom or soothe a scared kid. He'd climbed from a baggage handler to CEO over 3 decades, a black man who'd shattered every glass ceiling in his path. "What's going on, kiddo?" Brianna swallowed, her words tumbling out faster than she meant them to. "Uncle James, I'm at the airport. A flight attendant, her name's Lauren. She said my ticket wasn't valid, then tore up my passport. She called it fake, said I don't belong in business class. She did it in front of everyone. And I can't let this go. She broke the law, and I want her to pay for it." Her voice cracked on the last words, the weight of the moment spilling over. There was a pause on the other end, a heavy silence that stretched just long enough to make Brianna wonder if she'd said too much. Then James spoke, his tone shifting to steel. "She did what?" His voice was low, controlled, but Brianna knew that edge. It was the sound of a man who'd fought his own battles and won. "Where are you right now?" "Terminal D, near Gate 12, she said, glancing around. "I'm not on the plane yet. Boarding's in 20 minutes. "Stay there," James said, his words clipped. "I'm handling this. She'll regret it, I promise you that." The line went dead, and Brianna let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She didn't feel relief, not yet, but something else stirred in her chest, a spark of power, a sense that this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Back at the counter, Lauren laughed with a coworker, her voice carrying over the crowd. "You should have seen her face when I ripped it up," she said, brushing a strand of hair from her eyes. "Some people need to learn. They can't just waltz in here like they own the place." She didn't notice the shift in the air, the way the terminal seemed to tense, as if it knew something she didn't. Lauren thought she'd won, thought Brianna was gone for good. She couldn't have been more wrong. Brianna slipped her phone back into her pocket, her hands still trembling, but her resolve hardening. She didn't want to lean on James. She'd spent her whole life proving she didn't need to. But this wasn't about weakness. This was about justice. And if Lauren thought she could get away with this, she was about to learn a lesson she'd never forget. Brianna Carter stood near Gate 12 in Terminal D, her torn passport still clutched in her hand as she watched the clock tick closer to boarding time. It was 3:25 p.m., and the steady hum of the Atlanta airport pulsed around her. Announcements echoing, travelers rushing past, the faint scent of jet fuel drifting in from the tarmac. Her chest felt tight, but her jaw was set, her eyes fixed on the check-in counter where Lauren Mitchell continued her work, oblivious to the storm about to break. Brianna's phone buzzed in her pocket, a text from her Uncle James. "On my way. Stay put." She exhaled sharply, her fingers tightening around the shredded pages. She didn't want to need him, didn't want to be the girl who called in a favor, but Lauren had left her no choice. This wasn't just about getting on the plane anymore. This was about dignity. Across the terminal, Lauren laughed with a coworker, her voice cutting through the crowd as she handed a boarding pass to a businessman in a crisp suit. "Some people think a ticket's all it takes to fit in," she said, smirking as she adjusted her name tag. "You've got to have the whole package, you know?" The coworker chuckled, nodding as she scanned another ticket. Lauren's confidence was unshaken, her movements smooth and practiced. She'd already forgotten Brianna, or so she thought, filing her away as just another problem solved, another passenger put in her place. To Lauren, the world was a hierarchy, and she stood firmly above people like Brianna. Tearing that passport had felt good, righteous even, a small victory in her carefully ordered universe. But that universe was about to crack wide open. The air in the terminal shifted as a group of people emerged from the escalators near Gate 10. Leading them was James Carter, CEO of Sky High Airlines, his presence commanding attention like a thunderclap. At 55, James was a broad-shouldered man with salt and pepper hair and a tailored navy suit that spoke of power earned through decades of grit. His dark eyes scanned the crowd, sharp and focused, as he strode forward with a small team of executives trailing behind him. 2 men and a woman, all in business attire, their faces serious. The Sky High logo on their badges gleamed under the fluorescent lights, a silent signal of authority. Passengers parted instinctively, their chatter fading as they sensed something big was happening. Brianna spotted him first, her breath catching as relief and nerves collided in her chest. She hadn't seen James in months, not since Thanksgiving when he'd tried to convince her to take a job at Sky High. But there he was, larger than life, moving toward her with purpose. He didn't smile, didn't wave, just locked eyes with her and nodded once, a silent promise that he'd handle this. She straightened her shoulders, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She wasn't a kid anymore, and this wasn't just his fight, it was hers too. Lauren didn't notice James at first. She was too busy waving through a family of 4, her tone clipped but polite as she handed back their tickets. "Enjoy your flight," she said, her smile tight. Then she glanced up, her eyes catching the movement near Gate 12. Her hands froze mid-motion, the smile slipping as she registered the man in the suit, the team behind him, and the way the crowd had gone quiet. She squinted, recognition dawning slowly, then snapping into place like a puzzle piece she wished she could unsee. James Carter, the CEO, her boss. Her stomach dropped, but she masked it with a quick cough, turning back to the next passenger as if nothing was wrong. James reached Brianna in seconds, his team fanning out behind him like a shield. He stopped in front of her, his voice low but firm. "You okay, Bri?" he asked, his eyes flicking to the torn passport in her hands. She nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah, just mad." He studied her for a moment, then turned toward the counter, his expression hardening. "Show me who did it." Brianna pointed, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. Her. Lauren Mitchell. James followed her gaze, locking onto Lauren as she processed another ticket, her movements now stiff, her confidence fraying at the edges. He took a step forward, then another, his team keeping pace. The crowd parted further, phones coming out as passengers sensed a confrontation brewing. The teenage girl from earlier zoomed in, whispering to her friend, "This is gonna be good." Lauren looked up again, and this time there was no mistaking it. James was heading straight for her. Her face paled, her hands fumbling with the boarding pass she'd been holding. She tried to recover, flashing a nervous smile as he approached. "Mr. Carter, sir," she stammered, her voice higher than usual. "What a surprise. Is there something I can help you with?" James stopped a few feet from the counter, his presence towering over her, despite the barrier between them. "Lauren Mitchell," he said, his tone calm but laced with steel. "You tore up my niece's passport, called it fake, said she didn't belong in business class. Is that right?" His words hung in the air, heavy and deliberate, each one landing like a punch. Lauren's mouth opened, then closed, her eyes darting from James to Brianna, who now stood just behind him, her torn passport held up for all to see. I didn't know she was your niece, sir," she said, her voice cracking. "I thought it was a security issue. I was just doing my job." James didn't blink. "Your job doesn't include breaking the law," he said, his voice rising just enough to carry. "That passport was real. You didn't check it, didn't call security, didn't follow protocol. You humiliated her in front of everyone because you decided she didn't fit your idea of who belongs here." He paused, letting the words sink in. "And now, you're going to tell me that was a mistake?" The terminal was dead silent now, the only sound the faint beep of a scanner in the distance. Lauren's face flushed red, then drained white, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. I'm sorry, sir," she stammered. "I didn't mean any harm. I just thought—" "You thought wrong," Brianna cut in, stepping forward. Her voice was steady, her eyes locked on Lauren's. "You didn't ask questions. You didn't give me a chance. You tore up my passport because you looked at me and saw someone you could push around. But you don't get to decide who I am." She held up the pieces, her hands no longer shaking. "This is real, and so am I." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Agreement, shock, a few quiet cheers. The man in the suit nodded. The mother with the toddler smiled faintly. Lauren's eyes widened, panic setting in as she realized the depth of her mistake. She turned back to James, her words tumbling out in a rush. "Sir, please, I didn't know. I'll apologize. I'll fix it." James raised a hand, cutting her off. "It's not about an apology, Lauren. It's about accountability. You abused your position, broke federal law, and disrespected a paying customer, my niece, because of your own bias. That's not a mistake. That's a choice." He turned to one of his executives, a woman in a gray blazer. "Get security over here and pull her file. We're checking everything." Lauren's knees buckled slightly, her breath hitching as the reality hit her. "Wait, sir, please," she started, but James was already turning away, his focus shifting to Brianna. "You're getting on that plane," he said, his voice softening. "I'll handle the rest." Brianna nodded, her heart pounding but her resolve solid. She looked at Lauren one last time, seeing the fear in her eyes, the smugness gone. This wasn't over, not yet, but for the first time since Lauren tore that passport, Brianna felt the scales tipping back in her favor. Justice wasn't just coming, it was here. The air in Terminal D felt electric as Brianna Carter stood beside her Uncle James, the torn pieces of her passport still in her hand, The clock above gate 12 read 3:35 p.m., just 10 minutes until boarding, but time seemed to slow as the crowd watched the scene unfold. Lauren Mitchell, pinned behind the Sky High Airlines check-in counter, looked like a deer caught in headlights, her face pale, her hands gripping the edge of the desk as if it could shield her from the storm she'd unleashed. James Carter, CEO of Sky High, stood tall and unyielding, his dark eyes fixed on Lauren with a quiet intensity that made the silence around them deafening. His team of executives hovered nearby, phones pressed to their ears, already setting wheels in motion. Brianna's heart pounded, but it wasn't fear driving it now. It was something fiercer, something that felt like victory. She'd faced Lauren head-on, spoken her truth, and watched the woman's smugness crumble. James turned to her, his voice low. "You're getting on that plane, Bree. I've got this." She nodded, her throat tight with gratitude and resolve. She didn't need to say anything. James knew her well enough to see the fire in her eyes. The same fire he'd carried through his own battles decades ago. Lauren's voice broke the silence, shaky and desperate. "Mr. Carter, sir, I swear I didn't mean to cause trouble. I thought I was protecting the airline. I'll make it right. Please, just give me a chance." Her words spilled out in a rush, her earlier confidence replaced by a frantic edge. She glanced at Brianna, then back at James, as if an apology could undo the last 15 minutes. But James didn't waver. He stepped closer to the counter, his tone steady but sharp. "You don't get it, Lauren. This isn't about a misunderstanding. You destroyed her property, broke federal law, and humiliated her because of who you thought she was. That's not a mistake. It's a pattern, and I'm done letting it slide." Before Lauren could respond, 2 security officers in Navy uniforms approached, their radios crackling softly. The woman in the gray blazer, from James's team, stepped forward, handing them a clipboard. "Lauren Mitchell," she said, her voice clipped. "We need you to come with us. There's an investigation starting now." Lauren's eyes widened, her breath hitching as she realized this wasn't just a reprimand. "Investigation?" she stammered. I don't understand. It was just a passport. Why?" "It's not just a passport," Brianna cut in, her voice rising above Lauren's protests. She held up the torn pieces, her hands steady now. "It's my life, my work, my right to be here. You didn't even check it. You just decided I didn't belong. And now you're going to face the consequences." The crowd murmured, a mix of gasps and nods rippling through them. The teenage girl filming zoomed in, her friend whispering, "She's not backing down." James motioned to the security officers, who stepped closer to Lauren. "Take her off the floor," he said, his voice calm but final. "We'll handle the rest through HR and legal." Lauren shook her head, tears welling in her eyes as she backed away from the counter. "No, please, I need this job. I didn't know." But the officers were already guiding her away, one hand on her arm as she stumbled forward, her protests fading into the noise of the terminal. The crowd watched in stunned silence, phones still raised, capturing every second. Brianna exhaled, her shoulders relaxing slightly as Lauren disappeared around a corner. She turned to James, her voice soft. "Thank you, Uncle James. I didn't want it to come to this, but..." He placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm and warm. "You don't have to thank me, Bree. This isn't just about you. It's about everyone she's hurt. And trust me, she's not the only one who's going to answer for this." As the boarding announcement for Flight 345 crackled over the speakers, James pulled out his phone, dialing a number with swift precision. "Get me HR and legal on a conference call," he said to someone on the other end. "We're digging into this woman's record, I want every complaint, every incident, on my desk by tonight. He hung up, his jaw tight. Brianna knew that look. It was the same determination that had turned him from a baggage handler into a CEO, the same drive that had built Sky High into a powerhouse. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The story didn't end with Lauren's exit. Later that evening, as Brianna sat on the plane, her seat secured with a replacement boarding pass James had arranged, word began to spread. A passenger who'd filmed the confrontation posted the video online, titled, "Flight Attendant Humiliates Black Woman, Gets Fired by CEO Uncle." It went viral within hours, racking up thousands of views and comments. People shared their own stories in the replies, tales of rude staff, unfair treatment, moments of being dismissed because of how they looked. Brianna didn't see it yet, her phone off for the flight, but the ripple effect was already growing. Back in Atlanta, James sat in his corner office, the city skyline glowing orange behind him. His team had uncovered more than he'd expected. A former Sky High employee, Maya Jackson, reached out after seeing the video. Maya, a black woman in her 30s, had worked under Lauren 5 years ago as a gate agent. She'd been bright, ambitious, and good at her job until Lauren made her life hell. "She targeted me from day one," Maya told James over the phone, her voice steady but thick with memory. "Extra shifts, impossible tasks, little comments about how I didn't fit the image. Then she lied to management, said I'd yelled at a passenger. There was no proof, but they believed her. I quit because I couldn't take it anymore." James listened, his pen tapping against his desk as Maya spoke. "I kept evidence," she added. Emails, a voice memo from a meeting where she laughed about getting rid of me. "I didn't know what to do with it back then, but when I saw what happened to your niece, I knew I had to call." She sent the files over, and when James played the memo, his blood ran cold. Lauren's voice crackled through the speaker. "Maya's out of her league here. They only hired her for the diversity stats, but she won't last. People like her never do." The recording ended with her laughing, a sound that echoed with the same arrogance she'd shown Brianna. By midnight, James had everything he needed. Lauren's file was thicker than he'd imagined. Complaints from passengers about rudeness, subtle notes from coworkers about her attitude, a pattern of targeting anyone who didn't fit her narrow view of acceptable. The investigation concluded with a unanimous decision from Sky High's board. Lauren was fired, effective immediately, with a permanent ban from working for any Sky High affiliate. Legal action followed. Destroying a passport was a federal offense, and the airline pressed charges. By morning, Lauren sat in a holding room at the airport police station, her career in ruins, her smugness replaced by a hollow stare. The video kept spreading, sparking outrage and conversation online. News outlets picked it up, headlines flashing, "Sky High CEO fires employee for racial misconduct," and "Black woman's stand goes viral." People praised James's swift action, but it was Brianna's name that trended. Her quiet strength, her refusal to back down, her words to Lauren echoing in every share. She landed in Atlanta at 6 p.m., oblivious to the storm she'd ignited, her mind still on her presentation. But when she turned on her phone, the notifications flooded in, and she realized this was bigger than her, bigger than Lauren, bigger than one bad day at the airport. James met her at the gate, a tired smile on his face. "You're famous now, kiddo," he said, pulling her into a hug. Brianna laughed, shaking her head. "I just wanted to get home." But as they walked to the car, she felt a shift inside her, a sense that this wasn't just about getting justice for herself. It was about Maya, about every passenger who'd been brushed off, about every person who'd been told they didn't belong. Lauren was gone, but the fight wasn't over. And Brianna was just getting started. Brianna Carter stepped off the plane into the familiar chaos of Hartsfield-Jackson's Terminal South, her backpack slung over one shoulder and her torn passport tucked into a side pocket. The Atlanta evening wrapped around her, humid air seeping through the jetway, the faint hum of traffic beyond the airport walls, and the chatter of travelers rushing to baggage claim. It was just past 6 p.m., and her presentation was still hours away, but her mind wasn't on the slides she'd prepared or the suit she'd packed. It was on Lauren Mitchell's pale face as security led her away, on her Uncle James's steady voice promising justice, on the weight of the moment she'd just lived through. She felt different, stronger, somehow, like a piece of herself she'd kept buried had finally broken free. James met her at the gate, his navy suit slightly wrinkled from the day's chaos, but his presence as commanding as ever. He pulled her into a quick hug, his deep voice rumbling against her ear. "You made it, kiddo, and you're famous now." Brianna pulled back, frowning. "What are you talking about?" He handed her his phone, the screen glowing with a video thumbnail. Her standing at the counter holding up her shredded passport, Lauren's panicked expression in the background. The title read, "Flight Attendant Humiliates Black Woman, Gets Fired by CEO Uncle." Over 1 million views. Her stomach dropped, then flipped. "This is everywhere?" she asked, scrolling through the comments. Praise, anger, stories from strangers who'd faced the same treatment. "Yeah," James said, his smile tired but proud. "You started something, Bree. People are talking, and they're listening." He took the phone back, slipping it into his pocket as they walked toward the exit. "But first, let's get you home. You've got a big night ahead." Brianna nodded, her mind spinning. She hadn't meant to start anything. She just wanted to get on her plane, to fight for what was hers. But as they drove through Atlanta's twilight streets, the city lights blurring past, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. By the next morning, the story had exploded. News channels ran segments on Sky High Airlines, dissecting Lauren's firing and James's swift response. Social media buzzed with hashtags, "Justice for Brianna," "Sky High Reckoning," while influencers and activists weighed in. People posted videos of their own airport run-ins, calling out rude staff, unfair profiling, moments when they'd been made to feel less than human. Brianna's quiet stand had struck a nerve, tapping into a frustration that ran deeper than one torn passport. She saw it all unfold from her tiny apartment in Midtown, her laptop open as she prepped for her presentation, notifications piling up on her phone. She muted them, focusing on her work, but the weight of it lingered. James didn't let it fade. That week, he called a press conference from Sky High's headquarters, a sleek glass building overlooking downtown Atlanta. Standing at a podium with the company logo behind him, he addressed the cameras with the same calm authority he'd shown Lauren. "What happened to my niece Brianna Carter was unacceptable," he said, his voice steady. "But it's not just about her. It's about every passenger who's been mistreated, every employee who's been silenced. Sky High is better than this, and we're going to prove it." He announced a company-wide overhaul, new diversity training, stricter anti-discrimination policies, a zero-tolerance stance on bias. "This isn't a PR move," he added, his eyes locking on the reporters. "It's a promise." Brianna watched the live stream from her living room, her coffee going cold as pride swelled in her chest. James had always been a fighter. He'd told her stories of his early days, dodging racism in the airline industry, proving himself when no one else would. Now he was using his power to change things, and she'd been the spark. But it wasn't just his fight anymore. When she aced her presentation that night, securing a full-time job at the startup, she realized something. She didn't want to stop at one victory. Lauren's firing was justice, but it wasn't enough. There were more Laurens out there, more systems that let them thrive, and Brianna couldn't unsee it. Inspired by her friend Marcus Hayes, she found her next step. Marcus, a lanky 25-year-old with a quiet strength, had been her rock since high school. He'd faced his own battles, random stops by airport security, extra scrutiny at check-ins, moments when his dark skin made him a target. One story stuck with her, a trip to Chicago where a gate agent accused him of stealing his own ticket, delaying him for hours while others boarded. "I didn't fight it," he'd told her once, his voice low. "I just took it, because that's what you do, but it eats at you." When Brianna shared her airport story, Marcus nodded, his eyes fierce. "You did what I couldn't. Don't stop now." She didn't. Over the next months, Brianna stepped into a role she hadn't expected, an advocate. She started small, speaking at a local community center about her experience. Her words raw but steady as people listened, nodded, shared their own tales. The crowd grew, students, workers, parents, all drawn to her quiet fire. She partnered with Marcus, who'd found his voice too, and together they launched a campaign, Fly Fair. It wasn't just about Sky High. It was about every airline, every industry, every place where people like them were dismissed. They pushed for transparency, for training, for accountability, their voices amplified by the viral moment that had started it all. Sky High led the charge. James rolled out the changes he'd promised, firing 3 more employees after uncovering similar complaints. He invited Brianna to consult on the new policies, her perspective shaping rules that would protect passengers and staff alike. Other airlines took notice. Delta and United announced their own reforms, spurred by the public pressure Brianna's story had ignited. News outlets called it the Carter Effect, a wave of change rippling through corporate America, all traced back to one young woman and a torn passport. A year later, Brianna stood on a stage at a national diversity conference in Washington, D.C., her navy blazer sharp against the spotlight. The room was packed, executives, activists, students, all there to hear her speak. She wasn't nervous, not anymore. "I didn't ask to be here," she began, her voice clear and strong. "I just wanted to get on a plane. But when someone tries to take your dignity, you don't stay quiet. You fight. For yourself. For the people who came before you. For the ones who'll come after. I'm not the CEO's niece up here. I'm Brianna Carter, and I'm here because I chose to stand up." The applause was thunderous, but Brianna's mind drifted to Marcus, to Maya Jackson, to every face in the crowd who'd felt invisible. She thought of her parents watching from home, their pride beaming through a grainy video call. She thought of James, in the front row, his nod a silent echo of her mom's old advice, "Fight with what's up here." And she thought of Lauren, whose life had unraveled while hers had soared, not out of revenge, but because choices had consequences. As she stepped off the stage, a teenage girl approached her, eyes wide. "I saw your video," she said. "It made me tell my story too." Brianna smiled, her heart full. She wasn't just a passenger anymore. She was a voice, a force, a legacy. The fight hadn't ended with Lauren's firing. It had grown into something bigger, something that stretched beyond airports and into the world. And Brianna knew, deep down, that she'd keep fighting, not because she had to, but because she could. Back in Atlanta, James watched her speech online, a quiet pride in his eyes. Sky High wasn't perfect, no company was, but it was better, and so was he. Brianna had changed him too, reminded him why he'd fought all those years ago. Together they'd turned one bad day into a movement, a promise that no one, no matter who they were, would be mocked for their last dollar again.